Hello, everybody, and welcome to the final Seattle City Council redistricting analysis hosted by Redistricting Justice for Seattle, a coalition of organizations with maps endorsed by hundreds of members of the Seattle community. And today we're going to be digging into what the final maps mean for our city, our communities, and what implications they'll have for the kind of representation that Seattleites will elect for the next several cycles until the next census cycle. I'm joined here by some of the folks who've been at the front of that effort and campaign, and we'll introduce them shortly. But as a bit of context for this live stream, if you are watching and you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat or in the comments of wherever you're watching the live stream. Some of you might be seeing it on the Redistricting Justice for the Redistricting Justice Facebook page. Some may be watching from the Washington Community Alliance Facebook page. Others might be on YouTube at the Washington Community Alliance channel. So wherever you are, make a comment about a question you have, and the esteemed members of the panel that we've put together here will be able to get to it. The other thing that's really important for folks to know is this is the first time our city has done a redistricting process with community input. We first got districts several years ago, but they were made by just a sort of centralized expert to begin with. And since we got census numbers in 2020, we were able to start a redistricting process that included commissioners selected by different parts of City Hall, and that allowed for community input for people to propose their own kinds of maps. The folks you're going to be listening to were there for the early stages of that census effort, making sure that everyone was counted so that when we did have a redistricting process, it included the most accurate data about our city and our communities. Organizations like the Urban League, Win-Win, organizations that are part of Washington Community Alliance were heavily involved in that 2020 census. Not only did we have, as a state, the second highest rate of self-response for much of the census process, Seattle was the leading city with the highest rate of self-response. And so this means that folks were able to work with really accurate data about who's part of our city. And many of them were involved in the state redistricting process, and many then joined to work on local redistricting efforts. My name is Kamau. I use he, him. I'm the executive director of Washington Community Alliance, and will be helping host the panel and this conversation with Andrew Hong, who's been leading Redistricting Justice for Seattle, a coalition of organizations and individuals across the city focused on winning fair maps for the city. We're also joined by Katie Stoltz at Win-Win Network, which has over 52 partners that work to conduct civic engagement across our state and in our city, and Nairé from the Seattle Metropolitan Urban League. To begin, I will allow all of you to introduce yourselves, and then we'll go over the agenda we have for folks watching the stream. Starting with Andrew, would you like to introduce yourself, and then Katie and Nairé?
Yeah, hi, my name is Andrew Hong. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the statewide coordinator of the Redistricting Justice for Washington Coalition, and also co-leading the Seattle Coalition for Redistricting at the local level here in the city of Seattle.
And my name is Katie Stoltz, she, her pronouns, and I'm the senior political manager at Win-Win Network. I have been supporting with the Redistricting Justice Seattle Coalition over the past really 7 months, and then the statewide coalition before that. I'll hand it over to Nairé.
Hi everyone, my name is Naire. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the advocacy program manager with the Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle. And we started working with redistricting justice last year in the statewide redistricting process.
Thanks so much for us joining. Folks are going to be really lucky to be hearing from all of you about what led up to this redistricting process, the maps that we got, and what they mean for everyone. I'll offer up for Katie if you want to just talk through this 4-part agenda that people will be listening to, and then share a little bit about the background of the coalition and the redistricting process with Naire.
Great. Thanks, Kamau. So over the next hour, we're hoping to really touch on an overview of really what happened during the Seattle redistricting process. So we'll hopefully provide a little bit of a background of really what challenge was at hand for this process, how we got to our own Redistricting Justice for Seattle map proposal, but also how we got to the final map. And then we'll also do a deep dive into some of the data analysis of really what these maps mean for the next elections. So I'll kick it off and just give a brief overview of really what the process was like and how we led to the current process we have. So this is a copy of the map from the 2012 through the 2022 really cycles. And so again, as Kamau had noted, this really is the first time that the Seattle districts have had public input in creating these new lines. And so this, the maps actually were first used in 2015. And then 2019 was the second set of elections that these districts were used. So for the most part, these are actually pretty new districts, and districts are actually a new process for the city of Seattle. It was used as a way to really create greater representation on our city council by ensuring that we could have representation across the city, specifically representing different areas. And so that brings us to our work right now. So if you want to go next, I can talk a little bit about really how our coalition was formed. So the Redistricting Justice for Seattle Coalition has really been working since January of this year on the tails of the statewide process as the across the state of Washington, folks moved into working on local city and local county processes. Members of the statewide coalition who did work here in the city of Seattle really decided that it was going to be critical to bring together a coalition to ensure that we had a transparent process, that we were really calling to make sure that we had representation in the Seattle process, because we saw how critical it was, again, in the statewide. So this is a list of some of the organizations that were involved. I just want to name a few of them. Fixed Democracy First was a center point. We had Cindy Black, who is the executive director for Fixed Democracy First and was one of our steering leaders. We also had Asian Counseling Referral Service executive director or advocacy manager Joseph Lockman was one of our other steering members for the coalition, as well as the Urban League, Win-Win, the Washington Bus, a PACE, and many, many more that were gathered over the 7-month period. You want to go to the next slide? Just to give an overview of really what this timeline looked like, really what happened over the past 7 months. For some folks who really entered the conversation around redistricting really over the tail end of it, this has been really happening since January. So I can go over a brief overview of really what that looked like. So in January, when the coalition was forming, one of the critical pieces that we wanted to ensure was that all of the feedback and input that we had gathered really from the statewide process, we wanted to ensure that we brought that to the commissioners. So early on, I believe as soon as the commission was formed, that was one of the priorities for the coalition, was to bring that feedback to ensure that community engagement was a priority in this process. Moving into the really May through July period, when the commissioners held all of their district specific hearings, they held 7 hearings between the months of May through the end of July, really starting with District 1 and 2. I think the earliest one was like May 10th or May 15th. So really the Redistricting Justice for Seattle Coalition maintained a commitment to ensure that we had folks at all of those public hearings and that we were gathering our own feedback as a coalition to make sure that the maps were informed by a community across the city. Moving into July and August was really where the coalition really went more closely into the work of actually building our own map proposals. And we actually created a draft map and submitted that to the commission at the end of July, before the final draft map was released on August 2nd. We were so grateful to see that the draft map almost nearly matched the Redistricting Justice for Seattle final map, which really for us shows that they had been listening throughout all of those district hearings across the city over really the entire summer. That moves us to the September, November, which is where I think most folks probably entered the conversation. And really the months of September and November were about maintaining that focus on making sure we had folks turning out to those hearings. We had the majority of testifiers were in support of the Redistricting Justice for Seattle priorities, and we heard that consistently. And really in the tail end, we're able to mobilize over 300 folks in support of making sure that one of the final options of splitting the UW community was something that did not happen in the final map. And we're grateful to say that organizing was successful. So this is just a quick overview of really the work that happened over 7 months, and not just in the tail end, if folks have any questions, but we wanted to give that overview to the folks who are listening today. I want to hand it off right now to Naire from the Urban League to really talk about some of the work that the Urban League led. They were hands down one of the most critical organizations to the work that we saw and the success that we saw. And so I wanted to hand it off to her to talk a little bit more about that work.
Thank you, Katie. Yeah, it was a long year, so I'm like, where do I start? But I would say that one of the first things that Jude, who also organized heavily with me on this project, we did a lot of research into how our city councils were established. And one of the reasons that we started off with research is because one of our main goals of community engagement is education, and really prioritizing informed input. And also the fact that, the city council districts were so new. I mean, I was a freshman in high school when they were established. I had no idea. It definitely was on the back of my mind when they were established. And so we dove really deep into, the history of our city council districts, the history of urban developments and gentrification and displacement, and how that all aligns with representation and who we elect in our city council. We actually really dug deep into Yesler Terrace because there have been a few different developments that have happened without community's input. And we also saw that same area was also split between different city council districts. And so they were even more vulnerable. And then lastly, we wanted to teach how to participate in the redistricting process. And so as you can see on the screen, we've had some workshops and some listening sessions. We also made sure to spread out the word via op-eds. And so we were featured in the Medium, the Times, as well as the South Seattle Emerald. And we can go to the next slide. I just really wanted to emphasize how we really prioritize that, in order to get community feedback, it needs to be informed input. And that even required us to dig deep into, who created these city council districts? Why weren't communities involved? How can they be more involved? And how will this affect our communities? And so our targeted demographics of who we did outreach with aligned with, our organization. So we reached out to BIPOC residents within District 2 and 3. I would say specifically South Seattle and Central District were our main targets. And of course, Yesler Terrace, which I think, growing up here, we used to really see them as part of the Central District. We also really targeted youth and young adults. So as you can see on the pictures, we were already pretty much doing work in high schools. We were doing civic engagement workshops with the city. And so just making sure that we were teaching more information about redistricting and how to be involved really helped with increasing that engagement as well. We also prioritized reaching out to Black-led media and making sure that whoever we were doing outreach with, it reached the communities that we wanted to work with. So we work with, Day with Trey over at Converge Media. We partnered with Tony over at Rainier Ave Radio. Again, we were featured in the Emerald as well as the Medium. So I think that we really just wanted to make sure that we were intentional about the ways that we were doing outreach. We also provided like virtual, listening sessions as well as in person. And you can go to the next slide. Again, this was our first time. I mean, like this was the first time that we've ever done redistricting in Seattle. And so one thing that we reflected on, even though we felt like we definitely made a difference in providing outreach, we noticed that there was a lot of strengths and weaknesses with this process. And highlighting our strengths, I think that, because we were already a pretty big organization, we were able to integrate redistricting and how it relates to the work that we do to all of the people who we were already serving, such as voting, public health, environmental justice. Those are all topics that are connected heavily with redistricting. And so it was really easy to get folks involved and engaged in a subject as boring as redistricting, as well as providing digestible and accessible information. So we were able to really meet people where they were at. And we were also able to have flexibility in our outreach process because we wanted to make sure that it was a grassroots movement. And then ending on our weaknesses, I think one huge thing, especially doing outreach in Yesler Terrace, was the language barriers. It was really hard to connect to certain communities who English wasn't their first language. It was also really expensive. So translating is not really a cheap thing. So I think if we were to advocate to the city, we would ask for them to do more work in translating materials, capacity as well. And then I would say like there's definitely difficulty in navigating how the city did the process this year. Like I felt like we were definitely rushed by timelines. Other, districts had more time to organize around it. So we had to fight around that. And then lastly, I think one of the biggest things that we struggled with, especially with the Black community, is, trying to emphasize that redistricting is important, but wondering how it can be used as a tool to protect communities while we're in the midst of displacement and gentrification, especially a District 2, because we're the most heavily gentrified area. So all that to say, because I felt like I was rambling, but it definitely was, a learning lesson. And I'm looking forward to the next redistricting process. And I'm passing it off to Andrew.
Great. Thank you, Naire, and thank you, Katie, for going over how we formed our coalition. On the next slide, I'll be going over, what we did with all of the education that the Urban League really headed in. Our other coalition members led in the early months of the process into the actual puzzle of drawing a map proposal, because the first thing that our coalition was charged doing, we self-charged doing, is to draw our own map proposal. And so every single community education event that we did with the Urban League and as a coalition as a whole was aimed towards, of course, educating folks on what is redistricting, how it impacts them, but also to try to get input from different neighborhoods, from different communities of interest, of what would a equitable, fair, and legal map look like. And that's what we did. And the puzzle of doing that is, of course, centered around the balancing the district population numbers. So on the left side, the leftmost map that looks more blue, that shows the change in population from 2010 to the most recent 2020 US Census. And the darker blue areas show where there was the most population growth. And kind of the two takeaways from that map is, one, population growth throughout the city is uneven, and population growth in the city was most centered in District 7, or the downtown area, which you can see on the middle map, which is purple. That District 7 is the darkest shade of purple, which means that in the current, or the now not current, but a week ago current, or the old city council district maps, after the 10 years of population growth the city experienced from 2010, District 7 was the most overpopulated district. Districts 3 and 4 also had big population growth, whereas districts 1, 2, and 5 did not experience as much growth as the other districts did. And the puzzle of redistricting is centered around trying to make sure all of those different shades of purple there's just one shade of purple throughout the whole city, where every single district has the same number of people in it. And so this meant that we had to find the most equitable and fair and legal way to condense districts 7, 3, and 4, and then expand districts 1, 2, 5, and 6 to get to a population of 105,288 people per district approximately. And after weeks and months of internal discussions, community education events, and looking at public comment, we got to our final map proposal. And I can quickly go over each of the different districts, and I'd love also Naire and Kay to jump in on parts that they want to emphasize. But as a coalition, we're really focused on communities of color, and that's centered a lot around districts 1, 2, and 3. Districts 1 and 2 both had to expand, so move north. And one of our biggest priorities that I can say is that we wanted to keep Asian American communities in Beacon Hill, South Seattle, and the Chinatown International District together. And that was challenging because Asian American communities in District 2 in South Seattle are right on the western boundary of District 2. And District 1 had to expand first east and then also north. And so a big part of our fight was making sure that Asian American residents in those neighborhoods were kept whole in District 2. Anyone else want to highlight parts of our RJS map proposal?
I think based on what you're sharing, for folks following along who have been tracking the whole process or know all the nuances about redistricting, it sounds like one of the reasons you would want to keep communities together in a district is if there's a community of interest that is large enough and lives around the same area to be in one district. That allows the folks in that community to be able to go to their representatives. And also, if you're a council member, you just inherently know that this is an important part of the district. This is an important constituency, and you're less likely to do things without engaging that community. And the size of that community might also matter, because if they are, for example, thinking about Asian Americans in the Chinatown ID area, that really makes sense for them. If you're thinking about other demographics like college education, there's a lot of college educated people in Seattle, and they're kind of distributed everywhere. And so that isn't the type of community of interest that you would want to try to draw lines over. Is that the way that people should be understanding the importance of keeping communities together and what that approach is meant to do?
Yeah, I can take a stab at that. Yeah, we especially are interested in, keeping together communities of interest that have been historically underrepresented and marginalized in the city. And so that definitely means, BIPOC and other, minoritized young people, students throughout the city that typically have not had a voice. And so I also want to highlight just some other parts of the map. Hope others can jump into. We worked really hard to make sure that the UW community, which is a very young and student-oriented community, was kept together in District 4.
I would add with Yesler Terrace, one of the reasons why we really focused on them, again, like going back to the research on all of the developments in history, that Yesler Terrace was really like a safe harbor for a lot of, people of color that have been displaced. And so I guess it was confusing to us why that area was also split between different city council districts. And there was no, I would say, like real reason behind it. And so I think that was one thing that we wanted to make sure that we emphasize, is that, we need to make sure that this place remains a safe harbor for, people of color. And so that was one of the reasons why we prioritized Jesuit Terrace in this.
If I can add just one note on that, is I think that was another conversation that the coalition had, and that came up actually, I think, in testimony, was the importance of really acknowledging the difference between historical communities and historically divided communities, and really the importance of understanding the history of Seattle. And I think what Naire had mentioned, with starting first with understanding that history and how critical that was for our coalition. And I think for the most part, really, that was centered in our testimony from the very beginning. And so making sure that that was also something the commissioners understood as well. And so that, I think, was definitely a piece of the conversation, as we saw later in the process, that became a central point in a lot of the testimony and challenges that other folks had. And so I think that was something we noted, was just understanding the difference between, again, historical communities versus historically divided communities, and understanding really why that's critical that we take that into consideration in making our decisions with this new map.
And on that point, Katie, to focus in on it, part of Naira, what you're saying is, if you had split the Yesel Terrace community without any real reason, in effect, what that would mean is, for the next decade, folks that live in Yesler Terrace would have a diluted voice, right? And not really be a significant constituency of either district. And their interest might not be heard when it comes to issues about transit or housing or spending for the city. Is that how folks should understand the implications of that issue?
Yeah, that's correct. Like I kind of have like a Sankofa outlook, where we have to look back and see how history repeats itself. And I think Yesler Terrace has always had a pattern of redevelopments happening without communities' input, and then being affected by it, and then always living in this state of fear of, will I be able to have affordable housing here anymore? And that fear comes from not being, protected. And so, what more way to be protected than to be kept together and heard by a representative? And so, that's totally on the nail.
And on that point, yes, a lot of our focus was districts 2 and 3. Before we go on to the next slide, I want to do a quick summary of the rest of these districts and why we drew them. Keeping the Duwamish River communities in Georgetown and South Park was a priority to get together. And so those are in District 1 in our map that we drew. Yesler Terrace has historic connections, one being together in one district, and also with the Chinatown International District in the south end. So that was drawn at District 2. We kept as much of the central district together as legally possible after coordination with central area communities there. The downtown core is the most, fastest growing, fastest diversifying, and young parts of the district. And so we aim to keep those communities together in District 7. And then in District 5, there's a growing BIPOC community around Northgate that we wanted to keep together and not be split by I-5. And last point I want to touch on is, another key priority of our coalition was empowering renters. Despite being a majority of the city, renters make up a minority of the city council, and historically have been underrepresented in government and in policy decisions. And so we wanted to make sure that renters were not harmfully packed into a few different districts, but were empowered across the entire city, because renters do make up a majority of the city and are, in all corners of the city. And so after we created this map, we then wrote a memo and submitted this map with all of the public testimony and input that we received, and our reasoning and a note of legal compliance, to the Seattle Redistricting Commission. And a few weeks later, they met on August 2nd to start drawing their final map, or their draft map proposal. And we can see on the next slide their result. And if you kind of remember what the previous RGS map looked like and compare it to this, it was very similar. And so Commissioner Shaw was one of the 5 commissioners who each drew their own individual map proposal. And after deliberating on August 2nd, the 5-member commission unanimously voted to approve this map for a final draft for the public to then respond to. And we were really happy that Shaw and this final draft map followed a lot of RJS's priorities. The districts look very similar, with a few small exceptions, but a lot of the key priorities that I voiced just a minute ago are reflected in this map. I'll let other folks here talk about what they like about this map, but I think keeping the Northgate BIPOC communities and keeping Asian American communities in the South End and CID, Chinatown International District together were big wins, and also a complete replica of our own District 1 as well. Anyone else have any thoughts on this map?
This is Katie. Something I would note and just wanted to add, if you look at the timeline of the process, is that this August 2nd commission map really came after having district public hearings in every single district from the months of May through July. So this was truly informed by those hearings. And so keeping in mind as we go through really what happened after this map and sort of the input and really backlash that happened, I just lifting up that folks had equal opportunity to lift concerns, knew what the challenges were going to be in terms of North Seattle. And so I just wanted to lift that up.
Yeah, and with that, Katie, you just reminded me, with the district forms that were used to create this map, a part of our coalition's work was to make sure that districts and communities that typically are not heard in this process, in the South End and the Central District, had a voice. And we were really proud that despite, having not as much time as other districts, we turned out districts 2 and 3 to have the most attended public forums. And I think that organizing communities did in our coalition, it was a direct factor into having this map proposal follow our priorities closely. So after the commission passed this draft map, most of Seattle supported it. However, it got backfire from mainly the Magnolia community and the Chamber of Commerce, as well as the neighborhoods of Pioneer Square and Eastlake. And in response to that backfire, I think mostly from Magnolia and Eastlake, the commission worked in Commissioner, I believe on the next page, Rory O'Sullivan proposed a new amended map. And also, along with Nalima Shah, proposed an amendment. O'Sullivan's amendment would work to cater to Magnolia concerns of splitting Magnolia between District 6 and 7 by moving all of District 6 to the Magnolia boundary to keep it all within one district. And consequently, he chose to move District 7 into Fremont, which would split Fremont between 3 different council districts. And then Nalima Shah concurrently proposed an amendment that would move all of Eastlake into District 3, which was currently split between Districts 3 and 7, and consequently move a little bit of District 7 up into the First Hill neighborhood. And both of these amendments passed 4-1, with Commissioner Juarez dissenting. And this kind of marks the start of the latter half of the process that was a lot more contentious, and I think, contentious and very, watched and had a high participation. Our coalition's response to this amendment was we supported Shaw's amendment to fix the Eastlake community. However, while we do have the goal of keeping all communities together and all neighborhoods together, the Commissioner O'Sullivan's amendment to move Fremont into District 7 and split between then 7, 6, and 4, I think was an egregious amendment. And our coalition worked to make sure that this, densely renter community and also growing and young community was not split between 3 different districts. It goes against our priorities of keeping communities of interest as together as possible in an equitable way. And so that means renters and young people especially. And splitting a neighborhood into 3 to keep one whole is not fair. And then also this specific amendment would have District 7 cross north of the waterway cut, while District 6 also cut south, which was a charter amendment violation. Yeah, I think any other thoughts on this before we go to the next kind of process point? Cool. I think we can go to the next slide. But after a few weeks of public engagement and mobilization, I think the RGS Commission did, especially in coordination with the Fremont Community Council, Malaba proposed amendment to reverse the Fremont Amendment, and it kept the East Lake change to keep it whole in District 3. But it moved District 7, again, south of the cut, keeping Fremont and that renter community whole in District 6 and 4 instead of split into 3. And then the next amendment, Katie kind of alluded to at the beginning, was the UW split amendment. On the next slide. Yeah, sorry about that. Commissioner O'Sullivan, again, tried to respond to Magnolia residents. And instead of splitting Fremont in 3 districts, his new amendment proposed splitting UW from the University District. And within a week, RGS organized 323 petition signatures, actually in just 4 days, against this amendment. And the UW community, and the U District community, and the greater community in District 4 organized. And Commissioner O'Sullivan then retracted his amendment after that public input. And that leads us to our final map proposal that the commission landed on, which is very similar to the August one, even after kind of that shuffling in the months of September and October. On November 8th, the commission voted on a vote of 4-1 with Commissioner Nichols opposing to pass this map, which just, looking at the August 2nd map, the only differences were just minor block changes in Magnolia. That actually ended up following the RGS lines closer than what was originally passed. Commissioner Nichols opposed on the assertion that Magnolia is a more important neighborhood that should not be split than UW or the Fremont community. Cool. And so I'll let others respond too, but we were very happy with this result. Obviously, the commission, despite proposing amendments to the map, stayed strong to, look and draw a map in an equitable way that kept historically underrepresented groups like students and young people and renters together around Districts 4, 6, and 7, as well as staying strong and keeping South End communities together. Yeah. Any other comments?
I think something I would add is something we saw, I think, in this final map, and we really saw come to light in one of the final meetings, was really a commitment to process by many of the commissioners, I think the majority of the commissioners. And I think even at that final meeting before the final vote, Commissioner Nichols actually tried to bring up an additional amendment or an additional map to try to have the commission look at it. And what I was really impressed by was the leadership of the other commissioners that really said, we promise to have a commitment to getting input from the community regarding these different options. And that's what they had said from the very beginning, back in really, I think even April in their conversations. And so I just wanted to lift up the leadership of those commissioners to really commit to that and say, we can't just bring in another option at the 11th hour. And that might be how other government processes work, and honestly, how historically they probably have. And so I just wanted to lift up how critical the leadership of those other commissioners to say, no, we can't look at another map at the 11th hour without getting full input, and knowing how close this map, the final map, matches the August 2nd map really showed that it had ample amount of feedback, and ultimately compromises had to be made. But I want to lift up the commitment of the specific commissioners, aside from Commissioner Nichols, in that 11th hour to stay committed to making sure communities had feedback, an opportunity for feedback around those options.
Thank you. Yeah, and now, with this final map, I want to go over, I think a large reason why we wanted to hold this is to go over the data behind this now map proposal to be in place through the 2031 elections all the way until 2033. So on the next slide, we'll get started on, I just wanted to also point this out. A statistic that we're really proud of is that 93% of the commission's final map mirrors the RJS's map proposal. I think that's a reflection of all of the education work that led into the community mobilization and smart legal decisions that our coalition made in our own proposal that reflected why the commission's map closely mirrors our map. Cool. Going on to this. Oh, yeah. I think one thing that we'll touch up right now before we get to the data analysis is that what happens now, one, these maps will be implemented in the 2020, used in the 2023, 2027, and 2031 City Council districted elections. And then also quickly noting that Magnolia has, they're in the process of filing a lawsuit against the city, despite not citing any specific charter amendment violation or a state or federal law violation. Instead, they just assert that Magnolia should not be split, but doesn't have any legal evidence for why they believe the map as it stands now should be struck down. And I want to add that in our map proposal, as well as the commission's map proposal, was made and drawn under consistent and very strict legal interpretations of the laws that we have at hand. And I can say with confidence that our map would stand in court, as well as the commission's map, which had a constant eye of a city attorney's office on to make sure that the map that the commission passed was fully compliant with the law.
This would be a great time to talk about this whole episode around the Magnolia Chamber of Commerce and their interests. I think for people who've been following City Hall politics for a long time, they know that there's a lot of popular policies and issues, especially around housing, that don't seem to pass, even though so much of the city wants it to. And the redistricting process seemed to shed even more light on that and put a magnifying glass on the process, because once the status quo was going to change, there were going to be new district lines that were widely popular with different organizations across the city, hundreds of people endorsing the maps. At the last minute, the major business interests at the Magnolia Chamber of Commerce started attacking the maps and using dog whistles, calling organizations like the Urban League, special interest groups, and dismissing the popular movement that had grown around the district lines. But you all seem to navigate that whole process really successfully, where in past eras, when dog whistles and big business interests have deployed them, they've been able to split communities and win in a kind of divide and conquer strategy. So I'm curious to hear from all of you, how did you end up winning the argument against Magnolia, against the Magnolia Chamber of Commerce, and what do you think led to the maps being adopted? Before then, we look at the data and get some questions from the audience.
I can start an answer really quick. I think that we responded in numbers. We had people power, and we organized our communities to give testimony. And I think that carried our message through.
And backing off of that, I would say we were just very transparent about our needs as well. And, in comparison to a wider, wealthier neighborhood, there's so much more that our communities need, and so much more at stake if we were split even further. And so, like, as much as, we tried to hear them out, their argument wasn't compelling, and mainly for that reason. Like, they argued that, they need to be together in order to protect their public assets. Meanwhile, we have communities of color and low-income communities that don't even have access to the same type of assets. So that's one of the things I think that really kept us in line in that fight, was just making sure that we highlighted that this is an actual need, and this is something that has been asked for decades, and it needs to be recognized.
Yeah, and I'll just add too, I think that one of the arguments was that they would lift up is that it would lose them political power. And I think that something that could be noted is seeing the levels of privilege around what it takes to do community outreach and sort of engage. They, seeing as the numbers that they were able to pull out in a short period of time is just an example that their loss of political power is not going to be a problem for their ability to really get a hold of City Hall, use their connections, and make what they need to happen. And really exactly what Naire said is that we lifted up, making an understanding of these are the needs. And I also believe that we were consistent throughout the entire process. That, when I think we saw this backlash lifting up again at the really tail end, we made a conscious decision that we would double down on our map and our the work that had been done really since May, and to just continue to lift that up and say this is the priority. And I believe that the commissioners heard that, and they heard that time and time again. And I also would lift up that when we looked at the different neighborhoods and in terms of really where a lot of this noise was coming from, it truly was just one neighborhood. So when we look at District 6, we had quite a few folks who were in support of the Redistricting Justice for Seattle map proposal who were from Ballard, and the other parts of District 6 who said, no, this is the right decision for our district. And so I think that was also critical, is to really see the groundswell of support from across the entire city for these priorities.
Absolutely. And I think the fact that community and organizations and people came together across race and across geography in the city really early on made it hard to win that divide and conquer strategy, and made sure that the commissioners that were appointed kept their commitments as far as the values of what they espoused and wanted to vote for, which made it really difficult for them to backtrack afterwards. And I think if people watched the state redistricting process, it looks a lot different. I know we're running low on time, so we'll do a speed round of some new data that I know, Andrew, you were able to gather about what the implications of the maps are, and then take some questions for those who are watching at home.
Yes. Thank you, Kamal. Going into the data analysis part, first is just kind of a little brief overview of what the changes in the maps looked like. The big changes were part of Magnolia is now in District 6. Wedgwood is in District 4 now, and then more of the Greenwood neighborhood is moved from District 6 into District 5. Going down south, District 1 is expanded to Pioneer Square in Georgetown, and District 2 is expanded north into more of Mount Baker and also Yesler Terrace. Next slide. This is just the differences between the Commission's map and the RGS map. In short, very little differences. 93% of the map is the same. Going over to racial data, Here is a look at where people of color live in the city and where they fit into city council districts. District 2 remains the only majority BIPOC district in the 2012 map, as well as the new map and the RJS map. Keeping communities of color as a part of keeping communities of interest together. And definitely historically right-aligned communities in the South End are a community of interest that we sought the commission to keep whole, and the commission did. Next slide. Here's just a breakdown of the numbers. Again, just want to highlight the highlighted part here shows the new district maps, and District 2 remains the only district that has a majority of residents that are people of color, but also I think more importantly, 60% a majority of eligible voters or people of citizen voting age population are people of color as well. And that is important. And then here is a look at an income map of the city of Seattle and by districts. You can see that District 2, it's also the most working class district of the city, as well as District 5 has a lot of more lower income neighborhoods near the Northgate area. We wanted to make sure that low-income neighborhoods were kept together as much as possible, and so we tried to make that happen, especially in Districts 2 and also Northgate BIPOC communities in District 5. Going to the next slide, we wanted to also keep renters together, renter neighborhoods together, and also make sure that renters were not, harmfully packed or split up between different districts. And so this is kind of a look at the demographics of renters across the city in the 2022 commission's map. You can clearly see that District 7 is the darkest shade of blue-purple. That notifies or signals where the most renters live across the 7 districts who live in District 7, as well as District 3, 4, and parts of 6 have a large renter community there. And here's just a breakdown of those numbers. District 7, again, having the most renters by far alongside Districts 3 and 4. So going into the council elections, you'll see renters play a big role now in the new District 7. Going into these final maps, I want to first note that our coalition did not look at political data when drawing our maps. This is just a reflection of how the new districts would vote compared to the old district maps as we look into the 2023 elections. I know that was a question that a lot of folks had. So here is a map of the 2021 mayoral election between Lorena Gonzalez and Bruce Harrell. On the next slide, you can see kind of the breakdown of those numbers. I'm not going to go into it a whole lot for the sake of time, but I think the big 2 takeaways from the redistricting process in terms of what it means politically is that none of the districts changed that much politically. Most of the districts kept the same kind of political makeup within 1% of the old districts. So District 1, for example, voted for Bruce Harrell by 62.4% with the old districts, and with the new district now it voted for Bruce Harrell by 62.0% of the vote. The second takeaway marks the exception to this. District 6 and 7 did change political composition somewhat significantly by 3%. District 6 got more conservative by 3%, and District 7 got more progressive by 3%. So they just kind of like swapped or went in opposite directions. And I think the big reason for that is the placement of Magnolia between District 6 and 7. District 7 remains the most conservative council district in 2021's mayoral election. District 2 and 3 remain the most progressive ones. And then on the next slide, you can see just kind of the same map, but with the city attorney race. And I want to note that pink in these maps was Nicole Thomas Kennedy's performance. And in the previous map, it was Lorena Gonzalez's performance. And the green notes Ann Davison and Bruce Harrell. And then on the next slide, you can see the data again kind of shows the same thing as the mayoral election data. Little change from the old districts to the new districts, with the exception of District 6 and 7, where 6 got 3% more progressive towards Nicole Thomas Kennedy, and District 7 got 3% more conservative towards Ann Davison. I think, yes, no, flip that. District 6 got more progressive towards Nicole Thomas Kennedy, and District 7 got, no, District 6 got more moderate or conservative towards Ann Davison, and District 7 got more progressive towards Nicole Thomas Kennedy. Sorry.
That's right.
But yeah. And just noting again, as you saw from the data, I didn't talk about it a whole lot for the sake of time, but the final commission districts maps data was very similar to the RGS's district map data, and it reflects that the fact that 93% of those maps are the same. Cool, and there's just, again, a comparison between the commission's map and RGS's map.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that sprint of data rundown. I think this would be a great time if anybody has any questions for our esteemed panel. I think there is a lot of excitement. Part of what I think you emphasized is there might be people out there, whether they are allies of kind of Bruce Harrell's approach to politics, that people have reported as being more centrist or conservative, that, you know, we're concerned, and there are folks on the other side who really don't agree with that approach and want to see a more progressive city. But what this shows is, you know, actually the districts don't shift that much. And when you have such a large gap in between the candidate that won for mayor in the last election and you're looking at the current election, you know, there's really no way to shift significantly political outcomes and people organizing for the future that they want for their communities is the most important. Taking a look at some of the comments, we've gotten a lot of praise for the organizing and ways that the Urban League and Win-Win and so many others were able to reach here. There is a question maybe on that last piece of data on who is winning and who, you know, feels is supposed to feel the most, I guess, confident about the changes. And then we'll turn to another question from Sam.
Yeah, who is winning with this new map? I think that communities of color are winning. I think that renters across the city are winning. I think that students are winning. I want to highlight, you know, District 4, we wanted to keep the UW community together. And I was pleasantly surprised to see it. I think a UW student has announced their run for city council. And that's exactly why we wanted to keep the UW community together, so students can run and fight for representation for University of Washington students and community. And then in terms of like the politics, if that's what you were asking, I think District 6 progressives, or District 6 moderates are winning, and District 7 progressives are winning in this new map.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see more of those voices come to the forefront, more of the issues come around, especially on housing, which brings me to a question maybe for you, Naire, and Katie. Which is now that you know, we have the maps and the Magnolia Chamber of Commerce wasn't able to kind of make this last minute shift towards their interest. If you think that the constituents in District 6 and 7 and across the city are going to be getting more of a voice and hearing more from their city council members, and what issues you think they'll be more responsive to under the new district lines.
Are you asking for District 6 and 7?
That's what the question was specifically from Sam, but I think you can also just take more broadly to the rest of the city.
I guess I think something I would lift up is I do think that part of the conversation that we'd heard from really the argument from Magnolia was the challenge of having to engage with two separate council members for one community. And I think I would just lift up that in a lot of ways, I actually think that can increase the political power of a community. But I think that so I don't know if it's an exact answer, but I do think that the opportunity to, I know that District 7 is going to have to kind of actually geographically be a little smaller, is going to provide an opportunity for whoever is elected into that district to be able to fully focus on those issues, and to really be a voice really for the most majority renter community in the entire city. So I do think that will increase the opportunity for issues like housing and issues that renters really face that homeowners don't. So I think in that case, I think that will increase that opportunity. If that touches on that question a bit.
Yes, I think that's excellent. And we can wrap on two more questions that we got in addition to praise from Teresa Huey about how impressive it was and seeing more young people get involved in the process. One of them is, if you could amend the charter's redistricting rules, what changes would you make now that the city's gone through its first full cycle? And we'll take this kind from everyone, maybe Andrew, Naire, and then Katie.
One thing that I want to start off with is I think I would want to change the population deviation rule from 1% to a greater number. And that is that the 1% population deviation rule is that no district can be more than 1% in population different from any other district in the city. And for context, federal court's rule is about 10%. You can have a 10% population deviation. So 1% is pretty strict. And I think that constricts how well the commission and people are able to draw legal district lines that keep as many neighborhoods together. And I think especially looking towards the 2030 redistricting cycle, that 1% deviation rule, I think, is very likely to split a lot of other communities as the downtown area continues to grow. And expanding 1% to like 5% or 10% leaves more wiggle room for the commission to keep communities together while having to worry about like making every district exactly the same number of people.
I think as far as community engagement, one thing that I think that they should definitely invest more in is community education. It definitely, I think, took a lot more time for us to get feedback from community because a lot of our communities did not know about the redistricting process, let alone what district that they lived in or that we even had city council districts. And so I think that's a good start, is to actually start informing the community about these huge changes, and being intentional about them, and actually conducting culturally competent outreach, such as, language access. Is it digestible, or are you using like legalese to explain it? And then also providing background in history and how race relates to redistricting. I think that provided, a huge barrier for a lot of folks to participate. And I think another thing that was commonly brought up to me from community meetings about redistricting is how we choose who's on the commission. Because it seems like a lot of the commissioners had a background in politics for our city for a long time. As Commissioner Nichols mentioned, he worked in politics for over 50 years. And so I would say probably, have more community input in how we elect these commissioners as well.
I'll just add one final thought to that is just to second what Naire just mentioned is I actually do think that when you talk about structural components of how the Redistricting Commission is run, I do think that at least the Seattle process in comparison to other city councils and city processes across the state, having commissioners actually being appointed by different bodies, I think was critical in the differences of perspectives that we actually saw on this commission. And I think that absolutely one step further beyond that is having some opportunity for recommendations or input from the larger community to be able to inform who those positions are and who are in those positions. Because I definitely think what we saw was that made all the difference, was who we specifically had in those positions. I think just specifically lifting up the leadership of Commissioner E.J. Juarez, who really, I think from the get-go worked from really his values, and I think really spoke to that, and I think was and I think just seeing leadership like that is critical in processes that have to do with creating political alliance for people's lives.
Awesome. This is really great. I also would just want to shout out Joanna, who made the comment, importantly, that the Seattle School Board is also looking at using these outlines as the maps for the city, to also have balanced and fair maps for the school board.
Correction, they did use it. They did use the Redistricting Justice
There you
Seattle map
go.
as a model for their final map.
That's super exciting. And one more question for Andrew, and then I think we can wrap from this also from Joanna, which is about the analysis of the deviation question. How does that work out with a much smaller population in a congressional district and more divisions than a congressional legislative district? If you had a larger deviation in the population, yes, there's more flexibility, but is that flexibility a good thing when there's a lot, there's a much fewer people at the local level?
Well, when you use percentage deviations, it kind of fixes that problem. Since city council districts have less people, 1% of a city council district is much less people than 1% of a congressional district, if I'm understanding this question correctly. So the deviation, when you use percentage points, they kind of are proportional to the size of whatever jurisdiction you're drawing.
And so even though the population is smaller,
the raw number of
constraints are roughly the same. And that's your reasoning for why to apply that setting, is that it actually wouldn't deviate, it wouldn't be that much different than redistricting at the congressional or legislative level.
Yeah, basically. When you're a 10% population deviation at congressional level is, roughly like it is several thousand people, whereas at the city council level, it wouldn't be more than like 2,000, 3,000 people deviation. So it doesn't get into a problem, at least by the federal court's definition of violating the 1 person, 1 vote rule. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we've gone over, but there was so much to dig in. We could be here for another hour. To wrap up, for anyone who's watching, just want to go around the table here and have people share how people could get in touch with you or your organization with any questions. Redistricting Justice for Seattle and Redistricting Justice for Washington were incubated at Washington Community Alliance, a network of organizations of color that incubates and launches coalitions led by our members. For people to stay in touch, you could subscribe to our newsletter, The Tally, or read the blog at our website, which aggregates a lot of the articles that our members are highlighted in, like the ones that Naire, Katie, and Andrew talked about. Andrew, Naire, and Katie, closing us out. If people want to get in touch with you, follow the work of your organizations, or ask follow-up questions, where should they go?
Yeah, to reach me or the RJS Coalition, email team@redistrictingjusticewa.org.
Yeah, and to reach me, in Petty at urbanleague.org, or you can visit our website at urbanleague.org.
And then this is Katie at kstultz, KSTULTZ at winwinaction.org.
Awesome. Thanks everyone who tuned in. Thank you to everyone who testified to the commission, who gave your input on the maps, who endorsed it, who texted a friend about an upcoming commission meeting that they needed to be at and testify. It made a huge difference to have a balanced council, fair districts, and an increased voice for communities who have been drowned out of the conversation for too long. So we've been real excited about this process and excited to share more in the future. Thank you to all of you for tuning in.